Hello, welcome back to Boring History. Before we begin, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders. You don't need to focus too hard here. If you enjoy slow stories like this, please like the video. It helps the channel more than you think. If you want more calm history like this, please subscribe. New boring stories come every week. And before we start, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? What country, what city, or even just your time zone? Now, let's go back in time to a world before movies, before music players, before games, before entertainment existed. Chapter 1. Waking up with nothing to look forward to. Imagine waking up in a world where mornings do not promise anything new. There is no alarm clock pulling you out of sleep, no device glowing beside your bed, no reason to feel rushed or excited. People wake up slowly, guided only by sunlight, body rhythm, or the sounds of others already awake. For most of human history, mornings were not moments of anticipation, but moments of acceptance. The future of the day was already known before the eyes even opened. A farmer knew the soil would feel the same beneath his hands. A craft worker knew the tools would move the same way they always had. A servant knew the same commands would be spoken in the same tone. There was no schedule filled with variety. No expectation of surprise. No emotional reward waiting later in the day. Getting out of bed did not unlock opportunity. It simply began repetition. This is why many people stayed still for a moment after waking. Not because they were exhausted, but because standing up changed nothing about what was coming. The day would unfold exactly as expected. Whether it started now or a few minutes later, morning light revealed the same walls, the same ceiling, the same surroundings that had existed for years, sometimes for generations. Life did not move forward in leaps. It circled quietly, returning to the same point again and again, and people accepted this rhythm without resistance because there was no alternative to imagine. Outside the home, the world looked deeply familiar. Villages rarely changed. Roads remained dirt paths shaped by countless footsteps. Houses stood where they always had, built not for beauty but for survival. Faces were known, names were known, and surprises were rare. Information traveled slowly, if it traveled at all. There were no headlines to absorb attention, no announcements to spark curiosity, no stories breaking the routine of the mind. Breakfast, when available, was simple and repetitive, often identical to the day before. Bread tasted like bread. Water tasted like water. Choice was limited, and because of this, decision-making barely existed. After eating, people did not rush into activity with urgency or ambition. Work waited patiently, just as it always had. And before it began, there was often a long pause filled with nothing but waiting. Waiting for light to grow stronger. Waiting for others to be ready. Waiting for permission from those in authority. Waiting was not an inconvenience. It was the default state of existence. Children learned this early, watching adults sit quietly, stand silently, and allow time to pass without protest. They did not complain of boredom because boredom had no comparison point. There was no memory of excitement to miss. Play, when it happened, came from scraps of imagination rather than designed entertainment. A stick became a tool, a weapon, or a companion. A stone became a toy. Often, nothing became something simply because there was nothing else to do. Boredom in the past did not feel sharp or overwhelming like it can today. It was not loud, anxious, or filled with frustration. It was wide, calm, and endless. There was no escape from it, but there was also no pressure to escape. People did not feel the need to distract themselves because distraction had not yet been invented. Time was not something to be killed, managed, or optimized. Time was something people lived inside, slowly and patiently allowing it to pass without resistance. Mornings blended into afternoons, and afternoons faded quietly into evenings, each part of the day carrying the same emotional weight. Waking up did not feel like the beginning of a journey toward pleasure or fulfillment. It felt like stepping into a familiar loop, one that would repeat tomorrow and the day after that. This lack of expectation shaped the human mind for centuries, teaching patience, endurance, and emotional stillness. People did not ask whether life should be exciting. They asked whether life was stable, survivable, and predictable. And in that predictability, boredom was not the enemy. It was simply the background of existence, a quiet companion present from the moment people opened their eyes each morning. Chapter 2. Waiting as a daily activity. In the past, waiting was not something people tried to avoid. It was something they expected. Much of daily life was built around waiting, not action. People waited for water to fill containers, often standing beside wells or rivers for long periods of time with nothing to do but watch and think. They waited for bread to bake slowly over fire, for soup to warm without burning, for animals to move at their own pace. They waited for daylight to grow strong enough to work, and later waited again for darkness to signal rest. There were no shortcuts and no alternatives. If something took time, it simply took time. Letters, when they existed, arrived weeks or months after being sent, if they arrived at all. People learned not to expect answers quickly or at all. A question could live inside the mind for years without resolution. This constant waiting shaped behavior. Movements became slower. Reactions softened. There was no reason to feel impatient, because impatience could not change the outcome. Waiting was not a pause between meaningful moments. Waiting was the meaningful moment. People waited for other people just as often. Meetings rarely started on time because time itself was flexible. Someone might arrive late because of weather, distance, illness, or obligation, and no explanation was required. Others simply waited, standing, sitting, watching the horizon. Children learned this skill early, observing adults who could remain still for long periods without complaint. There was no entertainment to fill the gap, no small talk designed to distract. Silence was common and comfortable. Thoughts wandered slowly, often circling the same ideas again and again. People replayed memories, imagined future harvests, or simply let the mind rest in emptiness. Waiting for authority was especially common. Servants waited for commands. Workers waited for instructions. Entire communities waited for decisions made by people they might never meet. This waiting reinforced hierarchy and obedience. teaching generations that action did not belong to everyone. Many lives were shaped not by what people did, but by what they waited to be allowed to do. Over time, waiting became deeply connected to patience and emotional endurance. People did not describe waiting as boring, because there was no alternative state to compare it to. Waiting was not wasted time. It was life unfolding at its natural speed. Even disappointment arrived slowly. If rain did not come, crops failed gradually. If help did not arrive, hope faded gently, rather than suddenly. There were no instant realizations, no rapid changes in fortune. Waiting softened emotions and stretched them thin across days, months, and years. This is why historical life can feel distant and unreal to modern minds. Today, waiting feels uncomfortable because it interrupts stimulation. In the past, stimulation was rare, and waiting was the default condition of being alive. People woke up waiting, lived waiting, and often died waiting not for entertainment or pleasure, but for small changes that might never come. Chapter 3. Work that never changed. For most of history, work was not a place of growth or ambition. It was a loop. People did not work to become something else. They worked to remain alive. A farmer did not dream of a different profession. A blacksmith did not plan a career change. Skills were passed down through families, and most people did exactly what their parents had done before them. The movements of work became deeply embedded in the body. Hands learned the same motions year after year, until effort disappeared and habit took over. The mind followed this rhythm, becoming calm, quiet, and narrow in focus. There was no deadline pushing faster progress, no reward waiting for creativity. Improvement happened slowly, if it happened at all, and often went unnoticed. Days blended together because work did not create milestones. There were no promotions, no achievements to celebrate, no sense of advancement. The work simply continued, unchanged by time, weather, or age. Many people could predict the rest of their lives by the time they were children, not because they lacked imagination, but because the world offered no alternative paths. Repetition shaped not only bodies, but identities. People were defined entirely by what they did, and what they did never changed. A person was not trying to be a baker. They were a baker from birth until death. This stability created safety, but it also created emotional stillness. There was little space for curiosity or experimentation. Mistakes were costly, so routines were protected and repeated carefully. Entire communities moved in synchronized patterns, waking, working, resting, and sleeping at nearly the same time. The sound of work filled the day, tools hitting wood, hands moving through soil, footsteps following familiar paths. Silence was rare during work, but excitement was rarer. Work was exhausting but predictable, demanding but emotionally flat. When people stopped working for the day, they did not feel satisfied or proud. They felt relieved. Relief replaced enjoyment, because survival, not fulfillment, was the goal. This unchanging labor shaped how people understood time and self-worth. A good life was not measured by happiness or passion, but by consistency. Showing up mattered more than feeling inspired. Endurance mattered more than enjoyment. Many people lived entire lives without questioning whether work should be interesting. The idea itself would have sounded strange. Work was something you endured, not something you loved. This is why boredom blended seamlessly into labor. There was no clear line between being bored and being busy. Both states felt similar, repetitive, quiet, and emotionally neutral. The absence of change was not seen as a failure of life, but as proof that life was functioning correctly, and so, generation after generation, people repeated the same work in the same way, not because they wanted to, but because nothing else had ever been imagined. Chapter 4. Evenings without fun. When work ended in the past, the day did not open into entertainment or pleasure. It simply became quieter. Evenings were not a reward for labor. They were a slow transition toward rest. As the sun lowered, activity naturally decreased. Not because people felt relaxed, but because light disappeared. Without artificial lighting, darkness controlled behavior. People gathered inside small homes where space was limited and familiar. There were no screens to glow in the corner, no music playing softly in the background, no stories delivered instantly on demand. Firelight flickered weakly, illuminating only part of a room, leaving the rest in shadow. Conversations, if they happened, were simple and repetitive, often about the same events discussed many times before. Silence was common and accepted. People sat close together, not for comfort, but for warmth. The evening did not promise joy. It promised only the slowing down of the body. Without entertainment, time in the evening stretched long and empty. Some people repaired tools, not because they enjoyed it, but because it filled the hours. Others stared into fire, watching flames move without purpose. Children listened to adults talk, absorbing words they had already heard many times. Stories existed, but they were limited in number and rarely changed. The same tales were repeated across years and generations, slowly losing detail and excitement. Laughter was rare, not forbidden, but uncommon. Energy was low, and excitement had no fuel. People did not seek stimulation because they did not know stimulation as a concept. The evening was not something to be used or optimized. It was something to survive until sleep arrived. As darkness deepened, tiredness replaced boredom. Bodies that had worked all day welcomed rest, even if the day itself felt emotionally empty. Beds were simple, uncomfortable, and shared. Privacy barely existed. People lay down early, not because they felt satisfied, but because there was nothing left to do. The mind slowed naturally, not from meditation, but from lack of input. Thoughts repeated themselves, then faded. Evening did not close the day with pleasure or reflection. It closed the day with silence. And this silence, repeated night after night, shaped a human relationship with rest that was deeply physical, deeply necessary, and completely disconnected from fun. Chapter 5. Boredom inside the mind. For most of history, people did not have a clear word for boredom, yet they lived inside it every day. The feeling existed, but it was unnamed, unexamined, and rarely discussed. Minds were not constantly stimulated, so they did not jump quickly from thought to thought. Instead, thoughts moved slowly, often circling the same memories, worries, or observations again and again. People replayed moments from the past, not for pleasure, but because there was nothing else to occupy the mind. A small mistake, a brief argument, or an unfinished task could live inside someone's thoughts for months. Without distraction, the mind stayed with one idea until it faded naturally. This made boredom feel heavy but calm, like sitting in still air with no wind. There was no urge to escape the feeling because escape did not exist as an option. Paragraph 2. Imagination worked differently in a bored mind. Without images, videos, or written stories to borrow from, imagination relied on personal experience and repetition. People imagined better harvests, healthier animals, or easier days. But these thoughts rarely went far beyond reality. Fantasy did not explode outward. It folded inward. Many people spent long periods simply thinking without direction, letting thoughts appear and disappear without urgency. This mental slowness shaped emotional stability. Extreme joy and extreme sadness were rare. Feelings stretched gently instead of spiking sharply. Even fear arrived slowly, giving the body time to adjust. Boredom softened emotional reactions, making people less reactive and more patient, but also less expressive. The inner world existed, but it was quiet and private. Paragraph 3. Because boredom was constant, people did not see it as a problem to solve. It was not something that damaged mental health or required relief. It was simply part of being awake. The mind learned to tolerate emptiness, silence, and repetition without panic. This tolerance became a form of strength, though it also limited curiosity and exploration. People rarely asked whether life could feel more exciting, because excitement was unknown. The bored mind did not crave stimulation. It accepted stillness as normal. Only much later, when entertainment and choice entered daily life, did boredom become uncomfortable. In the past, boredom lived quietly inside the mind, shaping patience, endurance, and a deep familiarity with silence. Chapter 6. Religion, Ritual, and Repetition. In a life filled with waiting, repetition, and emotional stillness, religion became one of the strongest structures holding time together. For most people in the past, days did not feel clearly separated from one another. Without entertainment, schedules, or personal goals, time could easily blur into a single, long experience. Religion created gentle divisions inside that blur. Prayers marked mornings and evenings. Rituals marked weeks. Festivals marked years. These moments did not exist to excite or entertain, but to remind people that time was moving forward. Even when nothing seemed to change, repeating the same words, standing in the same places, and performing the same actions gave the body and mind something familiar to hold on to. Faith was not always deeply emotional. Often it was mechanical, quiet, and routine. People prayed not because they felt inspired, but because prayer was simply part of the day, like eating or sleeping. In this way, ritual blended seamlessly into boredom. It did not remove it. It organized it. When life felt empty, repetition gave that emptiness shape. It made boredom predictable, and predictability felt safe. Religious repetition also softened fear and uncertainty. In a world without scientific explanation or fast communication, much of life felt uncontrollable. Illness appeared suddenly. Crops failed without warning. Death arrived without explanation. People rarely understood why things happened, only that they did. Religion filled these gaps with meaning. Not always logical meaning, but emotional meaning. Ritual allowed people to respond to uncertainty without needing answers. Lighting a candle, repeating a prayer, or following a familiar ceremony gave the feeling that something was being done, even when nothing could truly be changed. Silence inside religious spaces felt different from ordinary silence. It was intentional, shared, and protected. People could sit quietly together without pressure to speak or act. Even boredom felt different in these spaces. It became calm rather than heavy. Sacred repetition transformed empty time into purposeful stillness. People felt connected to generations before, them who had performed the same actions in the same order, often for hundreds of years. This continuity reduced loneliness. It reminded individuals that their quiet, repetitive lives were part of something larger and older than themselves. Over time, religion trained people to accept sameness as meaningful rather than empty. The body learned rituals so deeply that they could be performed without conscious thought. The mind rested inside patterns that never demanded creativity or excitement. This repetition encouraged endurance rather than change. People did not expect life to feel new or interesting. They expected it to feel stable. Faith taught that consistency was a virtue, that repetition was not failure, and that waiting itself could be sacred. This mindset shaped emotional resilience. People learned to live without constant stimulation, without novelty, and without personal fulfillment as a goal. Meaning did not come from pleasure. It came from participation in a shared rhythm that repeated endlessly. Religion did not make life more exciting. It made life bearable. In a world where boredom was unavoidable, ritual became a shelter for the mind, offering calm, order, and a sense of belonging inside the long, slow movement of time. Chapter 7. Small Joys That Meant Everything. Part A, Paragraph 1, 2, 3. Paragraph 1. In a world where days repeated themselves almost perfectly, joy did not arrive as something planned or expected. It appeared quietly, often without warning, and usually disappeared just as quietly. People did not wake up thinking about happiness or fulfillment. Those ideas did not yet exist in the way we understand them today. Instead, joy was something discovered in passing, noticed only because life around it was so still. A change in the weather could feel meaningful. A slightly cooler breeze on a hot afternoon, or a warmer sun after days of cold, could lift the spirit without words. These moments mattered because they broke sameness, even if only briefly. People paid close attention to small details, not because they were curious by nature, but because there was so little else to notice. The sound of birds behaving differently, the smell of rain before it arrived, or the sight of clouds moving in unfamiliar patterns, could hold attention for long periods. These experiences were not exciting in a modern sense, but they created gentle emotional movement. Joy was not loud or dramatic. It was subtle, calm, and deeply tied to awareness. Because boredom was constant, the smallest shift felt significant, and that significance gave ordinary life a quiet, emotional texture. Paragraph 2. Human connection was one of the most reliable sources of joy. Even when interactions were limited and repetitive, conversation did not need to be clever or new to matter. Hearing familiar voices provided reassurance that life was continuing as expected. People often spoke about the same topics repeatedly, not because they lacked ideas, but because repetition itself created comfort. A shared memory told again could still bring warmth, not because it surprised anyone, but because it reminded them of belonging. Laughter happened slowly and naturally, often sparked by simple observations or shared misunderstandings. There was no pressure to be entertaining. Presence alone was enough. Meals eaten together carried emotional weight far beyond their nutritional value. Sitting beside others, sharing silence or a few words, made the experience feel fuller. Even children's play, simple and unstructured, created moments of softness in adult minds. Watching children move freely, laugh or invent games from nothing reminded adults that life contained movement beyond routine. These interactions did not eliminate boredom, but they softened it, layering connection over long stretches of emotional neutrality. Because joy appeared rarely, people learned to hold on to it carefully. Small positive moments were remembered clearly and for a long time. A kind gesture from a neighbor, a successful task completed with ease, or a peaceful evening without worry could sustain someone emotionally through many dull days. Joy was not consumed quickly. It was stored. People returned to it in their thoughts during long periods of waiting or work. This created a slower emotional rhythm where happiness did not spike sharply and disappear, but stretched gently across time. Expectations remained low, which protected people from disappointment. They did not demand joy from every day or even from every week. They accepted long stretches of emotional flatness as normal, knowing that something good would eventually appear, even if it was small. This mindset created resilience. Life did not need to feel constantly meaningful to be livable. The smallest joys, precisely because they were rare, became emotionally powerful. They anchored people, helping them endure repetition without losing their sense of being human. Beyond personal moments and quiet connections, joy also appeared through seasonal changes and shared events that broke the endless repetition of daily life. Seasons mattered deeply because they altered the rhythm of existence in visible ways. The arrival of spring brought movement after stillness. Fields changed color. Air felt different on the skin. These changes were not only practical, they were emotional. People felt relief not because life became easier, but because it became different. Seasonal gatherings, religious festivals, and communal rituals created anticipation long before they arrived. The anticipation itself became a form of joy. Knowing that something slightly different was coming gave shape to time. Preparation for these events filled days with purpose. Cleaning, cooking, traveling short distances, or preparing clothing created variation in routine. When the moment finally arrived, it rarely felt exciting in a modern sense, but it felt meaningful. People stood together, performed familiar rituals, and shared silence or simple words. Joy came not from novelty, but from shared presence. These moments reminded people that life was moving forward, even if slowly, and that they were moving together within it. Collective work also became an unexpected source of joy. Tasks that were heavy and exhausting felt lighter when done together. Harvests, construction, or repairs required cooperation, and cooperation created connection. People worked side by side, matching pace and movement, often without much conversation. The shared effort created a quiet bond. When work ended successfully, relief transformed into a gentle form of satisfaction. This satisfaction was not pride or celebration. It was the calm knowledge that survival had been secured for a little while longer. Eating food grown or prepared together carried emotional depth. Every bite reminded people of effort, patience, and mutual dependence. Even exhaustion had meaning when it was shared. In these moments, joy was inseparable from survival. It was not something extra added to life. It was woven directly into the act of continuing to exist. These experiences taught people that joy did not require ease, comfort, or pleasure. It could exist alongside difficulty, quietly supporting the human spirit without demanding attention. Over generations, these small joys shaped the emotional foundation of humanity. They taught people how to endure long periods of sameness without losing hope. They showed that life did not need constant stimulation to feel worth living. Meaning could exist in brief moments, scattered lightly across time. This emotional economy made people patient, observant, and resilient. When entertainment eventually emerged, it built upon these ancient habits of noticing, waiting, and appreciating small shifts in experience. Modern pleasure may be louder and faster, but it rests on the same human ability to find value in moments. In the past, small joys meant everything because they were all that existed beyond survival. They were enough. They kept people grounded, connected, and emotionally alive in a world that moved slowly and asked for endurance above all else. Chapter 8. The first signs of entertainment. Entertainment did not enter human life as something intentional or planned. It slowly emerged from boredom itself, shaped by long days, repeated tasks, and silent evenings. People did not wake up one day deciding they needed fun. Instead, they noticed that time felt lighter when something interrupted its heaviness. A story told while working made labor feel shorter. A repeated rhythm helped movements stay steady. A familiar sound softened silence. These small changes were not designed to entertain. They were created to endure time more comfortably. Early entertainment was not about pleasure or excitement. It was about making waiting easier. People began to recognize that certain activities made long hours feel less heavy, even if those activities were simple and repetitive. Over time, these moments became expected, then welcomed. This was the beginning of entertainment as a human response to boredom, not as an escape from life, but as a gentle adjustment to it. Storytelling was one of the earliest and most powerful forms of this adjustment. Stories did not begin as performances with audiences and storytellers. They were shared memories spoken aloud to fill silence. People told stories while sitting together, working together, or resting at the end of the day. These stories were rarely new. The same events were repeated again and again, changing slightly as they passed through different voices and memories. Accuracy did not matter. Meaning did. Stories helped people organize experience, turning long stretches of repetitive life into something that could be remembered and shared. Listening to a familiar story did not feel boring, because the goal was not surprise. The goal was connection. Hearing the same story again reminded people that they belonged to the same world, the same past, and the same rhythm of life. Music followed a similar path. Early music was not created to impress or perform. It existed to support work, mark time, and soften silence. Simple rhythms helped people move together. Repeated melodies filled empty spaces without demanding attention. Instruments were basic, often made from available materials, and sounds were limited in range and volume. Music did not overwhelm the senses. It stayed close to the body. Songs were sung slowly, often with little variation, allowing listeners to drift in and out of attention. This made music compatible with boredom rather than a replacement for it. People could listen while thinking, working, or resting. Music became another way to stretch time gently, making long moments feel less empty without changing the structure of life. Alongside stories and music, simple forms of play began to appear, not as organized entertainment, but as natural responses to excess time and human presence. These early games were rarely competitive and almost never had clear winners or losers. They were built from what was available: stones, bones, sticks, lines drawn in the dirt. Rules were flexible and often changed mid-game. Because the purpose was not mastery or achievement, the purpose was to make time move differently. Play allowed people to step slightly outside the rigid structure of daily life without breaking it completely. Children played more freely, but adults participated too, often quietly and without enthusiasm. A short game could interrupt hours of waiting, making the day feel less heavy. Laughter sometimes appeared, but even laughter was restrained. Entertainment at this stage was still deeply connected to survival. It existed in the spaces between work, responsibility, and rest, never replacing them, only softening their edges. As these activities slowly became more common, they began to change how people experienced time itself. A story could make an evening feel shorter. A song could turn repetitive work into a shared rhythm. A game could transform waiting into participation. Time was no longer experienced only as something to endure. It could occasionally be shaped. This was a subtle but powerful shift. Entertainment did not yet demand attention or control emotion. It simply accompanied life, walking beside it rather than pulling it in a new direction. Over generations, people began to expect these small interruptions. Silence was no longer the only option. Stillness remained, but it now existed alongside gentle stimulation. This did not eliminate boredom, but it made boredom less absolute. The human mind slowly learned that time could feel different depending on how it was filled, even if nothing externally changed. Eventually, these early forms of entertainment laid the foundation for everything that followed. Theatre, books, performances, and later modern media all grew from the same simple need: to live inside time more comfortably. But it is important to remember that entertainment did not begin as pleasure. It began as patience. It began as a way to survive long days, quiet evenings, and repetitive lives without losing emotional balance. Modern entertainment is fast, loud, and endless, but its roots are slow, soft, and human. It was born from boredom, shaped by repetition, and carried forward by connection. Understanding this reminds us that boredom is not an enemy. It is the soil from which creativity, play, and meaning slowly grow, long before entertainment became an industry. It was simply a gentle response to being alive.